planners do. I am really excited about this session because I have got 4 amazing speakers for you today talking about different disciplines and areas of planning that you may not be working with at the moment, or areas of planning that you may not be familiar with. So as with all the other sessions, I am recording because I know that there's many people who probably can't make it here today. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen because we've got a slide pack as always. Is that shared okay? All good?
All good.
Thank you. So we've got a packed agenda this morning. So as always, welcome to this session. You should all know me by now. So I'm Kat Salter. I work for the Planning Advisory Service, and as part of my role, I'm seconded to the Local Government Association to lead the Learning and Development Programme for Pathways to Planning. I'll be joined today by Ben Sim, Highways Manager at Worcestershire County Council, Helen Markland, ecologist. She's got a dual role, both Doncaster and Mansfield. Jan Harwood from the Environment Agency, and Vanessa Clark, who is an ecologist and wears various other hats in her role at Gloucestershire County. And I'm supported here by my colleague Zane as well, just to help me manage all of the tech. So the way in which we're going to run today is after I finish speaking, I'll be passing you over to Ben and then we'll go through each speaker in turn. So the purpose of today really is to help you understand the breadth of the planning profession and the various disciplines that sit alongside the more traditional planning functions that you may be aware of, and really to get you thinking about how you can work collaboratively with partner organisations and specialisms, and also to really get you thinking about potential careers if you want to move and specialise into other areas of planning. It's very much broader than just the roles you may have at the local planning authority at the moment. Traditionally, I think many of you are in local plans or development management. So as always, I've briefly introduced everybody else, but I'd really like to find out about who's in the room here. So we've set up a Slido poll, so you can either scan the QR code that's on the screen now or join us at slido.com with the meeting link there. So I'm going to I'm going to stop sharing, and Zane will help us collate the information we have so far. Did I take that off too soon? Did you manage? Oh, there you go. The QR code's on there already. So the first one is which pathways to planning cohort are you in? So you should know by now, but cohort 3 are those of you who joined us in September, whereas the cohort 1 and 2 have been with us a while. So all of you responding so far are cohort 3. So I hope, oh no, spoke too soon. Cohort 2 here as well. So this is just really helpful for us to get a steer of the kind of level of experience and how much you've been, how long you've been working in planning in your various job roles as well. A few more coming through. I think it's, oh, one more. Can we move on to the next question, Zane? So most of you cohort 3, and most of you on their master's degree as well. I think there's more on pathways to planning on the master's programme, so that doesn't surprise me. And then because it is December, our next question is trying to gauge the festive mood in the room. I don't know if any of you are doing what I'm doing at the moment, but going through the various Christmas films. So I've watched some new ones recently that I've never seen before, like White Christmas, which I enjoyed. So nobody, oh no, we do have one, I think it's one Grinch in the room, but evenly spaced between feeling really festive, warm and cosy, and some of you looking forward to Christmas but expecting some levels of chaos. And I'm going to ask, Die Hard Christmas film, what do we think? Thumbs up if no. I could see a no from Vanessa. I think I saw a yes from Jan.
That's transport for me, Kat, so it's definitely a holiday film.
It's a holiday film. I rewatched it again recently and I was like, it's totally a Christmas film. It's set on Christmas Eve. It's all about going home for the holidays. But I would not want a Christmas like that. But that's really nice. Thank you so much for engaging. We'll keep the Slido open throughout the course of this morning. So if you do have any questions, as with previous sessions, please either pop them in the Q&A on Slido or put them in the Teams chat, and we'll make sure that we get to those and allow plenty of time for discussion. So Zane, if you can stop sharing, and then I will share my slides again and hand over to Ben. Is that shared?
Yep.
Yeah. But not moving.
No.
No. I managed one thing. Right, I'm going to stop again and try it again. Way people would do. Oh, see, I jinxed it talking about my lack of being savvy with tech. No, Zane, can you take over? I don't know what's happening. Thank you.
Can you see the slides?
Yes, thanks, Zane.
Oh,
brilliant.
Sorry.
Brilliant. Thanks, Zane.
you.
So, hello everyone. I'm Ben Sim. I'm Highways Development Management and Control Manager here at Worcestershire County Council. I'm going to talk you through about transport and highways in terms of planning. But if we just move on to the next slide, just a quick bit about me. About me, I am actually a qualified town planner. I have a master's in town and regional planning from the University of Sheffield, and I'm a chartered member of the Royal Town Planning Institute. I happened to fall into transport planning after I left university. I unfortunately left out in the middle of a recession and was struggling to find a job. But I'd always enjoyed transport when I was a kid. I was one of those kids who had a railway set, loved SimCity, and had a Matchbox motorway set. For some of those of you know who that is, some of you probably don't. But I would happily play with those. So I got approached about joining a graduate scheme with a consultancy called J&P Consultants, and then never looked back. And over the last 15 years, I've worked in a variety of roles in a transport planner, including Coventry City Council, Warwickshire County Council, National Highways and Leicestershire County Council, and I've done a variety of jobs from developing transport schemes and getting them planning permission, reviewing planning applications and determining them, looking at the highway impacts across the network and whether they're acceptable in line with the MPPF, and attending planning appeals and public inquiries. I've also helped support the development of local plans with providing a transport evidence base, and building up the transport policies, and then sitting during the examination in public and justifying that. At National Highways, I was the spatial planning manager for the whole of the Midlands, which was a really interesting role in terms of managing the strategic road network and enabling development whilst ensuring that the network continued to operate safely and efficiently, because it's a key component for the national economy. And there was always that balance, and it was an interesting job to do. Difficult at times because everyone wants development and we had to say no, but it was really interesting. And then at Leicestershire County Council, I worked in transport strategy and policy, developing their new local transport plan, which was really interesting in terms of aligning with public health and the impact transport has on benefiting people's lives around their health and well-being, but also trying to remove barriers to how they can access jobs and homes, especially around transport poverty. So when we talk about transport poverty, it's about it isn't just about the cost of transport and how that affects people, but it's about decisions that we make as policymakers and transport planners that impact on people's daily lives. So if we build a new settlement and it isn't sustainable and we don't have a bus service, you're alienating a loads of people from being able to access those services, or you're forcing them to own a car which they may not be able to afford, which then puts them in a spiral of economic decline and potential poverty. So it was a really interesting role there, doing that. What does a transport planner do? If we move on to the next slide, I put it into ChatGPT and said, show me a transport planner. And it did this doll, which slightly weirdly looks like me. I didn't give it a picture, but it made it look like me. So basically, ChatGPT thinks I walk around with a tablet, a plan, with a briefcase and a coffee cup. The coffee cup is accurate. I do have one. I do not have an e-scooter. I will admit that. They terrify me. So I don't do that. But from that, you would think that's a really simple role and that we do smart moves, cleaner cities, brighter futures. Well, actually, there's a lot more to being a transport planner. A transport planner, you're a jack of all trades. And by that, I mean you have to cover lots of different areas. As we move on to the next slide, I'll just talk through some of those. So as a transport planner, you can see transport planning sat there in the middle. We do a lot of research, we do data analysis, we develop business cases to support transport elements. But to do that, we need to get involved in planning. So we need to be involved in spatial plans, understanding national policy, strategic agendas, the economy and economic aspirations. We also need to understand what development proposals coming forward and whether they conform with standards, they're acceptable in terms of accessibility and sustainability, and they won't make the transport network unsafe or more congested. So when we say safe, we say, preventing conflicts between pedestrians, cyclists with motor vehicles. Who has precedent across the network? Well, everyone should have precedent, but those vulnerable users we need to protect. And when I say vulnerable users, I mean cyclists and pedestrians. So to do that, we have to get involved in transport engineering as well. We have to be able to understand the access design in terms of what that looks like and how that's going to operate. We have to audit it through road safety audits, and you may come across those. And they're documents where we assess the plans and to ensure that they're safe and what we're doing is suitable. And then we have other things like infrastructure design, where we design big pieces of kit, as I call them, but transport infrastructure that are needed to unlock sites which are maybe which are needed to be able to be brought forward. And then there's other elements where we engage with through urban design, project management, and economic evaluation. So all these different elements, it means that you're constantly on the move, you're constantly thinking. But it's great because as a transport planner, I get to work with so many different people. I get to understand their thoughts, their ideas, their perspectives, and then try and bring them into the transport arena to get to a solution which I feel comfortable with as a transport planner. It doesn't undermine the planning process and doesn't undermine what the planning authority wants. And also it enables the developer to deliver their site in a sustainable manner. So if we move on to the next slide, one of these big projects that we've got at the moment in Worcestershire is delivering Wychavon Town. Now, you may have heard that Worcestershire has been announced as one of the locations under the New Towns Task Force to deliver a new settlement. And the new settlement will be of up to 10,000 homes centred around Worcestershire Park Railway Station. As you can see in the diagram at the moment, really all that's there is the railway station. That's all we have. So we've got to create a brand new settlement here, but it needs new roads, it needs walking and cycling infrastructure, it needs schools, it needs other services and facilities. So we are working in partnership with the local planning authority, Wychavon District Council, and the County Council with Homes England and other parties to deliver this. And we've agreed that this needs to be an infrastructure-led development, which includes the transport needs for that community to be sustainable now and in the future. It also is providing us an opportunity to embed sustainable transport at an early stage and create a walkable, cyclable town. That's one of our aspirations. And the transport planner inputs into this, and I'll go on to some of them in more detail in terms of the different stages of how we got here, but it's currently working to identify the phasing for the strategic transport needs and off-site mitigation with our partners, and inputting into the master plans and design codes of the developers who are bringing their parcels forward within those boundaries. We move on to the next slide in terms of how did transport planners like myself help get to the position of having Wychavon Town identified. and allocated in the South Worcestershire local plan, which goes through its main mods early in the new year. Well, it all started with strategic planning. The transport evidence-based work we developed a strategic transport model for the county, which we used to assess the impact of the development and identify where those impacts were going to be and what mitigation might be needed to support the local plan and the site's allocation. Policy and regulation, we made sure that the siting aligned with the National Planning Policy Framework, as well as the local plan and our local transport plans. We're working with our consultants to develop the infrastructure design and setting out our specification of what we want, which is a walkable, a sustainable approach with walking and cycling at its heart. We've looked at data analysis and forecasting through that model to understand what the different modal splits and shifts could be within that site. And then we're engaging with a range of stakeholders as well, not just the local planning authority, but also national highways, because the site is near M5 Junction 7, Network Rail because of the railway station and the rail operators, as well as Active Travel England. We're also looking at sustainability initiatives to meet the vision-led approach for the development in terms of transport now and in the future, and looking at a really ambitious modal shift of 40% of active sustainable travel across the development, which is a big challenge and an ambitious one. And how we can support our community's health and well-being through active travel and sustainable travel by promoting those modes over the car. And obviously to ensure the transport networks operate safely and efficiently, and then manage the transport network's impact on the environment as well. And that's all through the planning applications that will come forward, through conditions, through Section 106, through SIL agreements, and delivering that. You know, being a transport planner, you have so many different hats on, you go into lots of different meetings, but it's really rewarding when you actually see it built and you can see the infrastructure on the ground. I, as I said, worked in Warwickshire and Coventry, and when I drive there, there's a number of schemes I drive through that have been built, and I see that I had a role in that, and you know, and I'm quite proud of that. It's still to this day. So I find it really, really rewarding. I have a great team here of a range of transport planners, mixture of engineers and planners, who actively engage collaboratively. So if you are thinking about transport as a career, I would highly recommend it. It's done me no harm and got to me where I am today. So I think the next slide is just if you are interested in transport planning or have any more, want to get some more information, some really good 3 websites that I use regularly is the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transport, the Transport Planning Society, and also the Royal Town Planning Institute. But that's the end of my slide deck. Hopefully I didn't go through it too quickly because I can talk a bit quick, but I don't know if you've got any questions, Kat, or want to move
no
into
questions so far. So if just a reminder, if you do have any questions, please pop them in Teams or on Slido. Thanks very much, Ben. I may actually be sneaky because we're gonna Helen's gonna run her own slides. So whilst we're just transitioning slide packs, I might ask you a question, Ben.
Okay.
I was really interested that you said that your ambition for Witch Haven is 40% travelling by active travel modes. What's the, and that's an ambitious target, what's the sort of average? What do you see on other developments?
So back when I first started, 10% was considered ambitious.
Wow, okay. So we're really pushing it
But
then.
we are
with
really,
40%.
we're really pushing it. But since COVID and obviously the climate change emergency that some authorities highlighted, but we know we need to adapt to climate change.
Yeah.
It's not about forcing people, it's about enabling people to have the choice of how they travel. But we also need a target that we need to try and hit now. So it just presents an opportunity that you have a railway station there, and that's really sustainable. You can get into Birmingham, you can get into Bristol, you can get into Worcester, you know. So really we need to use that as a focal point with active and sustainable travel in the first instance, rather than car-based journeys. But we're not discounting the car, because there will be some journeys that people have to use the car for. You know, if you've broken your leg, you're not going to cycle to hospital, are you? Someone will drive you. So, you know, it's being pragmatic about it, but it's always good to have a target to do that. It's just that it's a greenfield site. There's nothing there. So we might as well start with a really ambitious target and try and achieve it, basically.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Ben. That was really interesting. So do keep your questions coming in, as I said, through Slido or Teams. And we're now going to hear from Helen in her role as a local planning authority ecologist.
Have the slides come up? Just checking. Yes, excellent. Right, okay. So yeah, I'm Helen. I've been a local planning authority ecologist for the last 17 years, working for Doncaster Council and more recently for Mansfield. And how did I end up as a local planning authority ecologist? Well, my background's in biology. I did an undergraduate degree in biological sciences, and then after that, I spent a year doing field work in Arizona on a university research project studying nesting birds in high elevation forests in Arizona. So this is me up a tree where I had extracted these babies from, and we did put them back afterwards. But yeah, it was lots of fun. I then did a master's degree in ecology and environmental management, and I decided student life was for me. So I spent the next 4 years doing a PhD chasing blackbirds around botanic gardens in Cambridge and Auckland as well in New Zealand. Now, sadly, all good things come to an end, and after finishing my PhD, I got a proper job. So I went to work as an ecological consultant in the Midlands, near Coventry, actually, then. And I worked for a year there doing protected species surveys for things like bats and badgers, great crested newts and waterfowls. Now, on paper, this sounded like my ideal job, but the reality was somewhat different. It involved a lot of driving around the country, then standing outside buildings, dodgy buildings in parts of town you didn't want to be in, while the pubs kicked out, holding a bat detector. And when the job came up at Doncaster, I kind of thought, working in their planning department as their ecologist, I thought I'm going to go for that. And I read up a bit on planning policy because I had no clue about planning. And here I am. So what does a local planning authority ecologist do? Well, this is me and my colleague Louisa, and this is what I'd like to say we did. We sit in fields with a clipboard and a quadrat, and we count flowers in meadows. And we do get to do this sometimes, but sadly not all of the time. The role is much wider than that. This is the team that I work with in Doncaster. We're a diverse bunch of specialists. Basically, we've got ecologists, design experts, heritage and historic environment specialists, tree officers and policy planners. And we sit within the wider planning service in Doncaster, and we work closely with our colleagues in DM to provide technical advice on planning applications relating to our specialisms. So we had a head of planning a few years ago who coined the phrase that we were facilitating development. So we weren't just there to like refuse or approve planning applications. And it's a bit cheesy, but it is essentially what we do. We look at planning applications as they're submitted, and we try and set out where the changes are needed to make them acceptable in terms of planning policy. So as the ecologist, I advise the planners on issues to do with protected species, so things like great crested newts, waterfowls, reptiles, birds, badgers, bats. Protected species are a material consideration for determining a planning application. So part of my role is advising the planning officer, have the right surveys been done? Have they been done the right way, the right survey methods by qualified people? I'll advise on mitigation schemes that have been suggested, and I might suggest changes to layouts of schemes to make a development proposal more acceptable. So, for example, you might have a particular hedgerow that lots of bats coming out of their roost and they're flying along this hedgerow to get to their foraging grounds, and you might want to design a scheme such that hedgerows like those are retained. I also advise on designated sites, so things like local wildlife sites, sites of special scientific interest or special areas of conservation and special protection areas. So a development might have a direct impact on a site like that, so from things like habitat loss through actual development on the site, but also a more often indirect impacts. If you're going to build 1,000 houses on near a site next to a SSSI, you're going to increase the number of people visiting that site, that there's physical degradation, people walking on it, etc. Issues like that. Domestic pets, people's cats, they will predate on ground nesting birds. So Thornmoors, which site in Doncaster, it's got a European level importance population of nightjar that breed there, and they nest on the ground. So you wouldn't want to support housing applications that are very near site like that. So we'll also advise on mitigation for sites, changes again in layouts of designs, buffers next to sites to try and mitigate impacts that might occur. Yeah, I think the biggest change in our sector recently has been biodiversity net gain. So biodiversity net gain is where DEFRA produced a metric tool that basically an ecologist uses to assess the baseline value of a site. So here we have a proposed development site, it's worth 10 units. They use the same metric tool to assess the value of the site after development. So here we've got the site's worth lost some biodiversity value, it's now worth 4 units. So we've got a problem, we've not got a net gain. So they have to look and deliver some habitat off-site. So you would have the same metric tool assess an area of land outside when new habitats have been created, and that in this instance delivers 7 units. So you've got 4 units on site, 7 units off site, 11 units in total, and your 10% net gain is achieved. So all sounds very simple. However, BNG became mandatory in early 2024, and I think it would be fair to say it has been a steep learning curve for ecologists, for planners, for developers, and it's caused challenges, shall we say? But I think my view on it is it's a huge opportunity, and we've frankly for decades we've just been messing around at the edges with respect to biodiversity. We've been giving lip service to biodiversity loss and how we deal with that in development, and biodiversity net gain has got the potential to change that. So a large part of my role in the last few years, since 2021 I started on this, has been creating a habitat bank in Doncaster. So this is a site that the council owns near the main urban area. The picture at the top here is an arable field as it was back in 2023. We started habitat creation there, and we've now got meadow, grassland, and new woodland planting and new scrub planting. We're hoping to get this registered on the National Sites Register in the next few months. I keep saying that, in the next few months, but you know, these things, they take time. Our whole team in Doncaster, we are involved in other aspects of planning as well. So we're often quite heavily involved in drafting planning policy. So for example, I wrote the local plan policies on the natural environment. I've written SPDs on biodiversity net gain and biodiversity topics over the years. And I've also been quite heavily involved more recently in Mansfield on screening site allocations and flagging sites that are unsuitable from an ecology point of view to bring forward. So yeah, it's another sort of area that each of the specialists within our team would tend to feed into. One of the things I like about working in Doncaster is that we're set up quite well in that all our specialists, we sit within planning. We're not remote. You don't have the ecologist sitting in the parks department. We are centred in planning, and that works really well because we have good working relationships with the planning officers. As a result, we all know each other. And if I've got an issue with the site, I'll just go and have a chat with the planning officer about it, and those conversations really help. Certainly as well, between consultees, we sometimes find that we don't necessarily all want the same things. So we would have a workshop, or we'd do joint site visits for larger applications. So it's important that the different consultees understand what each other's requirements are from a site, and then we can try and, as a local authority, go back to the developer with a sort of unified stance of this is what we want, us having discussed the compromises internally. So this is a bit of an example of that. It's a site where there's an area of open space up in the left-hand top corner, and the developer was claiming that this was going to be a suds drainage basin, a wildflower grassland delivering BNG units, and a kick-around area for the children to play football on. So now reality is wildflowers don't grow in ponds, and kids can't play football underwater. So, you know, the space is at a premium, and we just need to allocate more land. That seems strange from an ecologist to say that, but I'd rather more land was allocated and less houses were built on it than the other way around. So we've found that developers are more recently, everything is a meadow. Oh yeah, it's a bit of grass on my site. Yeah, it's going to be a meadow grassland. And that just doesn't work for everyone in terms of all the consultees. So we've changed our approach with our HMM, our habitat management and monitoring plan conditions, and we sort of now specify that we want all the landscaping details to be approved fully before we agree the BNG figures. And that's really important because it gives opportunities for other consultees to put forward what they need out of a site as well. And the BND doesn't just get in there first. This is an example of a very site we had recently, a very simple one, where one of our new planners, he'd only dealt with householder applications before, had a fairly simple application for to put a small play area in on this area of grassland, and he was asked, he didn't know what to do about the BNG and validation. So we had a look at it. It was very simple. It's all modified grassland, and we sort of explained to him that it was triggering BNG because of the amount of development. So this is the post-development map. The red bit is where it's being the playground's been put. But we were able to explain it to him, and he then went back to the applicant, and we got all the right documents in. They didn't need an ecologist to do this. It was a really simple site. The architect was able to draw the plans, and we got the results back showing the net gain in biodiversity, which they achieved simply on this site with just a bit of tree planting. So this final example is, this is a site that's quite close to my heart. This is a site that we were consulted on at pre-app a few years ago, and a colleague of mine went out to look at, and he came back to the office and he said, Helen, you have to come out with me now. You have to come and look at this. And he took me out to see this site. He won't mind me saying he's well into his 70s now, and he's worked in Doncaster 50 odd years, and he's like, I've never seen a grassland with so many flowers, never seen a site in Doncaster like this. And we sort of stood there and we were like, oh dear, this is a bit of a problem, because of course the site's owned by the council. So just to make things messier, it's owned by the council. It's been allocated as an employment site in the local plan for years, and we had various other sites very close to this developed, and we'd been to those, and they weren't the same. It's very strange why this was so good, but it was really quite special, this site. And we sort of stood there and we were like, this sinking feeling, oh gosh, what are we going to do with this? And we sort of decided that we would lie in front of the diggers before they built on it. But we went back to the office, but before we do that, we wrote sort of our consultation response about the site and why it wasn't really suitable for development. That went back for pre-app, and then we started having to have conversations internally within the authority about the value of the site. So about a year later, I think we ended up back on site with the chief exec and various heads of service, explaining why we shouldn't be selling this site and we shouldn't be building on it. And amazingly, they listened. So we are now in the process of working out how we can fund some management on the site using BNG. So I'm just going to leave you with a misty morning over the Habitat Bank, and saying that I guess when I first started this job 17 years ago, if you'd asked me if I'd be there here this long in the future, I'd have laughed at you. But I actually really like working in planning. It is frustrating at times. I don't always get my own way, and I don't like that. But you get to make a real meaningful difference and change to places. And I think the best thing about where I work is the people, and I think that's what's kept me where I am. We had a volunteer day out here, and staff took time off work and they came out and they planted acorns with us in our woodland on our Habitat Bank site. So I had the head of planning on a day of booked annual leave out, making him doing some hard labour planting acorns, along with various other staff from the council. And I think that's what makes it. It's really nice working with such a diverse range of people. But thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Helen. That was really interesting to hear your career, and also how you sort of became an ecologist. And I like your phrase, you did a PhD and then thought I should get a proper job.
Yes.
I think it's PhD
reluctantly.
quite admirable endeavour in itself. You've also made some really interesting segues into what Jan's going to be talking to us about. So you're speaking about the importance of collaborating and working with other statutory consultees. So we're now going to move on and hear from Jan and the work that he does at the Environment Agency. Zaina, I don't want to mess up tech again. Are you okay to take the reins with the slides again? And I noticed we have had some questions come through. I'll pick these up as we go on. So please do keep them coming.
Hello. Yes, my name is Jan Harwood. I work for the Environment Agency. I have to admit, compared to some of the other speakers, I'm a young whippersnapper in the world of planning by many accounts. I've only been with the Environment Agency for just over 2 years now. I've been involved in planning a little longer than that. But we differ at the Environment Agency with some of the other perspectives you're going to hear today, because we are a statutory consultee. So if we, sorry, next slide, please. So I'll try and take you through a whistle-stop tour of what that means. A little bit of what it is that I do, but also how I got there, which is probably an entire session on its own right, but we'll try and squeeze that down into a shorter session. So if we move forward, please. What is a statutory consultee? Next slide, please. Well, so we have a role through the various parliamentary acts, laws, and various other bits and bobs in helping deliver the government's growth agenda. We're a key advisor to the decision makers. So some of you will be doing that role actively at the local authorities in a planning context. And we have a dedicated team facing planning within the UK called Sustainable Places. Until very recently, I was a member of the Sustainable Places team for the region of North London and Hertfordshire. So I covered anything north of the river and all the way up to, the north of Hertfordshire, effectively. So we do every aspect of planning, from individual planning applications to nationally significant infrastructure projects like HS2. I've worked on HS2 a couple of times now. Not my favorite project, but we'll get to that in a minute. And we also help out, give our advice on strategic planning. So whether that's local plan policies, SPDs, or otherwise regional planning initiatives or planning related activities like the LNRS projects. Next slide, please. Specifically, we are called the Environment Agency, but we're very set remit of topics that we provide advice on. Perhaps we should be called the flood risk and sometimes some groundwater, but not always, brackets, not surface water flooding agency, but doesn't quite have the same ring. So we're just called Environment Agency. But really, if it touches the water, it's within our remit. And the further you get away from water course of some sort, the further away it is from our remit. There are all sorts of quirks to things we are required to provide advice on versus stuff that we would like to provide advice on. And that's one of the challenges of a statutory consultee, is that we're not always, we don't always have the space to say all the things we would like to say and give all the advice we'd like to give, but those constrictions are something we have to work around. And something you'll pick up increasingly, having heard from the various people, is that there's a huge human element to the work of a planner, and the relationships you build and the way you give your advice is an essential part of achieving the objectives of your respective organization. And I'll talk a little bit more about that near the end. We also provide a pre-app service, not particularly heavily utilized these days, but it is there. So applicants can come directly to us and opine and seek our opinion and various positions on matters relating to our remit through a paid service. And then they can then rely on that pre-app advice as part of their submissions to local authorities. How it works in practice is not that straightforward, but that's perhaps for another time. Next slide, please. And finally, as I said, development plans, we take an active role in this. One of the key things we look at, as I say, is flood risk. So we are part of that duty to cooperate, which some of you, anyone working in the sort of the policy side of things will be fairly familiar with that term, though I think the latest round of changes announced by government essentially is replacing that with something else. But it used to be called something else before, but it always means the same thing in effect, which is that planning is not an activity that can be arbitrarily bound by some red line on a map. There is some cooperation required between regions, areas, councils, and even between specific sites on occasion. So at the strategic level, we provide that advice on SFRAs, for strategic flood risk assessments, which for anyone who's familiar with development or specific applications in flood risk areas is essentially one of the major blockers to development on occasion. It's one of the few aspects of our work which we can provide a fairly robust "don't do that" kind of objection on. I always use the same example when I talk about this, which is that it is a scale, from building perhaps a garage in a bit of flood risk area versus building an entire orphanage in functional floodplain. The latter being don't do that, and the former being think about it. We recommend you don't, but no one's going to die if you do that sort of thing. So as always, our advice is always a scale in that regard. Next slide, please. How did I get here? That's a great question. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I have a slightly unusual journey into planning. I'm similar to Helen. I'm an academic originally. I did a physics degree, and I worked in academia for a long time. And then my girlfriend, now wife, decided to move to London, and I decided that I could not be an academic and move to London. So I went and got a quote-unquote proper job, which I immediately regretted. I became a trainee patent attorney. I handled a lot of Google's patents in the UK. And then one day I decided that I couldn't be the bad guy anymore. I needed to do something with my life that perhaps had a positive outcome on the world. So I volunteered as to partake in politics, got myself accidentally elected, and within, I think it was about 2 weeks of being a elected member of a local government, I became the deputy leader, and I got given the planning portfolio, including planning policy and economic growth as well, and environment, but it's all bundled under one. I did that for 4 years. So I looked after the planning department in the borough of for about just under 4 years, and loved it. I loved planning. I loved what it meant. I loved the land use and then the way it interacted with all the other political decisions we were making, and everything ultimately came back to how we planned for the future and how we put together designs and aspirations for land use in our area. So I decided that the politics aspect was less for me, less fun. Planning, way more fun, and I went and did a master's in spatial planning and development at Henley in Reading. Which was an interesting experience as someone coming from the political side of things, because obviously it was quite a academic and practitioner heavy course, as is often the case. Enjoyed it immensely. I wish I could go back to academia. Every day I wake up thinking, why am I not in academia? And then I look at the paycheck associated with it and I go, that's why. I have 2 children now, and that's not really an option for me anymore. And many of you will probably identify that to a certain extent. And so what I wanted to do was, one of the aspects that I learned about in that really mapped it out for me was this idea of separating out the strands in planning, the social, the economic, and the environmental. And I wanted to be a specialist in that environmental pillar. And really what you do most on a day-to-day basis at the local authority is you weigh up those different considerations. And when you feel that your expertise and a specific expertise is required, you pass on an element to an expert and say, what do you reckon? What's the weight of that in planning terms? And they look at it and they play around with it a little bit. They look at it from different angles, go, I reckon this weighs about this much, and they pass it back to you. And you tuck that under your arm, and then you pass another bit on, and you collect all these bits and bobs, and then you try and make a planning judgment. You weigh it all up. So I wanted to be involved in the weighing up of those environmental considerations, which is why I joined the Environment Agency. Next slide, please. Almost immediately, the pathway to planning at the Environment Agency is a little different in that you don't actually need to know anything about planning necessarily to become a planning specialist at the EA. We train you up from a very early phase. A lot of the people that join us are either geography degrees or any other, actually, there's no limit. We tend to attract the geologist. I don't know why that is. I think there's a natural propensity to lean into this side of the sort of the planning as almost naturally as a consequence of that. But I'd say a good 30-40% of my team are geologists of some sort or another, and then the remainder are, as I say, a very broad church of people from very diverse backgrounds. But But almost from day one, what we'll teach you is how to process what actually happens when a planning application lands on your desk. And this letter on the left is a pretty standard letter we get from the local authority. You send about anywhere between 10 to 15 to some authorities, sending a couple of hundred a month of these to us. In theory, we're only supposed to receive the ones that are within our remit, but of course there's always a bit of a judgment call on what something falls under a remit. Planning isn't a science a lot of the time, it's a bit of an art form, and that level of human judgment factor is very difficult to replace with hard and fast rules. Something that I'm sure some of you will be aware of, the AIification of our lives is something that we feel very confident we'll be able to resist, because planning is a bit more about than just simple mechanical decision-making processes. It's a bit more of that judgment. So we receive a fair few of these, and then we process those internally in our own system, which means a lot of busy work. Sometimes it feels like, but it is essential record keeping, because, as you know, planning has a huge amount of scrutiny. So everything we do has to be tracked, logged, and available for public viewing or auditing if necessary. Next slide, please. But really, the day-to-day revolves around whether something is new or working on existing stuff. So on the new side, as I say, we screen applications. We look at whether there are things that within our remit, flood risk, groundwater risk, or other related environmental risks that we cover. We process those accordingly, and we do similar to what you do, which is we consult internally to our teams. We have lots of teams of specialists. We have a flood risk team, groundwater risk team. We have a FBG, fisheries, biodiversity, and geomorphology team. We have a flood asset team. So we have about 8, 9, 10, 11 different internal consultee teams. So we kind of mirror the processes you have, which is that I'm not an expert in every aspect of every environmental consideration. So I farm each of these out to various people, and I have a bit of a personal relationship with a lot of the people I work, because you have the same conversations over and over again. So you inevitably end up getting a sense of how things work, but you never quite, and I will never attain that level of expertise that some of those colleagues will have, obviously. And there's a lot of internal discussion. There's lots of things that happen, and you come across something on your desk and you think, oh, this feels a bit like this, but it could also be this. And then you have those internal discussions about what it might mean. And that's new application, existing applications. And I've highlighted one particular line there because actually what makes my world go round a little bit. It's what keeps me going, which is that when the existing applications, all those comments come back, and I formulate, very similar to many of you, what you will be doing already, formulate a report, and I submit that as, ultimately with the aim of submitting that as our formal response from the agency. But really where it shines, being a planner shines, is those problems that you have to resolve and make those judgment calls, or whether work through a particular mystery of legislation or regulation, and it can vary massively. So some of my favorites, well, the recent one that comes to mind is kayak use on the riverfront is a water compatible use. But what about the storage of kayaks? Does that constitute a water compatible use? Kayaks definitely float, but if you combine all of them in a shipping container, does that now also count as water compatible? Those are the kind of slightly more lower, lighter end of the spectrum of things we kind of have to juggle and figure out. Then I actually ended up digging up a fairly old 1964 regulation to kind of get to the bottom of that one. But and then on the other end of the spectrum of far more impact, HS2. HS2 is a particular kind of legislation that gives it very broad powers. And in one particular stretch in my patch, they had basically taken out a water course and moved it out of the way. So then we looked at, well, what are the implications of that from a biodiversity perspective, from a flood risk perspective? Can they do that? And if they can, what are the implications? Can we force them to mitigate? What extent? And that was a conversation that required myself in a room of about 10 lawyers, planning lawyers. Slightly more tense conversation than the kayak conversation, but equally interesting, if not more interesting, I would argue. And you have to sort of pull on all the expertise. And as many of you who will have dealt with your internal legal teams, you never get a yes or no answer from a planning lawyer. It's always, well, it depends. So at the end of the day, I had to write a report based on that. Well, it depends, and try and translate that. And really, that's what the job is about, taking all that expertise, all that really specific know-how, and translating that language into something that a decision maker can use to make a judgment call. So ultimately you have to kind of give an indication. I reckon that problem weighs about that much. Put that in the against column. This mitigation strategy is pretty good. Put that as a positive. It's about this much. Yeah, good luck figuring it out. And that really what it comes down to. Next slide, please. And that is the crux of a planner's life at the EA, is that it ends up inevitably being about managing all the relationships, because you'll have one consultancy that'll come back and say, this is totally unacceptable. They've only left a 7.5 meter buffer zone. We require 8 meters. And then you kind of have to go, okay, is that 0.5 meter actually sufficient to break this scheme? What does that mean? Well, let me go quickly have a phone conversation with a policy officer, which might be yourselves in some cases, and say, hey, here's where we are at. We think in this instance X, Y, Z, and there's that human element of talking through these issues, and perhaps the person who said that on our end is a little overzealous sometimes, and you have to sort of dial back their expectations in light of the planning regime. And in some instances, you think, no, that problem's much worse than that seems, because it connects in this broader setting, and actually the sum is greater than the individual parts. So that kind of judgment making and balancing of internal pressures, external pressures, you will hear increasingly in our line of work as planners that there's a huge amount of pressure from government for various outcomes, so you have to balance those things. As you become more and more senior within the planning world, those pressures become more and more poignant, and the judgment calls become more and more constrained in light of that. And then ultimately at the Environment Agency, what we're really looking at is limiting harm versus achieving gains. And this is a subject that, and Helen was particularly familiar with in her world, which is sometimes the ship sails past us and it becomes more about trying to limit harm. We never want to be in that scenario. We always want to go for the gains, but there is an element of pragmatism that is required of planners. There's sort of nicely circular, coming back to those pillars of planning, the social, the economic, and the environmental. Sometimes the decision is made that the economic or the social benefit is substantial enough to overrule some of those other concerns. And in those instances, our role shifts about, okay, how can we mitigate the harm? How can we ensure that the benefits are delivered in a manner that doesn't completely bulldoze our need to maintain the environmental benefits. If I can summarize what I do, I essentially operate on a currency of trust with developers and case officers. Building those relationships up over repeated cases. When developers feel that they are getting good value from our advice and that we're being reasonable and sensible in our suggestions and judgments of the proposals put forward, they create a bit of space. And I'm sure that any case officer who's worked in planning long enough will tell you, if you're having to quote specific policy or specific MPPF paragraphs to try and strong arm your way, you're in a tight situation. Or even similarly, if you're in a 106 agreement negotiation and you're having to really rely on some obscure piece of legislation somewhere, then you're in a tough spot. But if you've got that goodwill built up, that grey space you create, the human element that you create, is where you achieve most of your wins, has been my experience, certainly working in both the politics side and now the EA side of things. And there's much more to planning than just the rules and the laws. Inevitably it's a political affair, it's a human affair, it's one of negotiation. That's what we do.
Brilliant. I'm going to have to stop you there, Jan. I'm sorry.
Sure.
We just got to pass on to Vanessa, and I think you've ended on a high, really good summary there in terms of the role of planners and what the Environment Agency do as well. And I love your passion and enthusiasm, and I've been making notes in terms of common themes across all speakers, talking about the level of expertise you need in your role, how you draw on the expertise of others, and really that way of collaborating both with other specialists and planners as well. So our final presentation is from Vanessa. So she's going to be giving a archaeologist perspective. I am aware that there are questions coming in. Please do keep them coming. They've been really good to see what you're interested in the questions, and we'll have time at the end to pick up on some of those. So Zane, if you're okay to share Vanessa's presentation. And I've also really enjoyed hearing about all your pathways into planning, all your current job roles. I find it absolutely fascinating. So thank you, and over to Vanessa.
Thank you. I'll try and take you through a whistle-stop tour of archaeology because there's lots and lots of different elements, but this is going to focus on the planning side today. So we'll stick on the title screen just for a moment. You'll see there's lots of different pictures up, and what I want to get to is how all these things come together. So you've got a site plot, if you like, on the left-hand side. You've got an excavation underway in the middle, and you've got a finds box in the top right, and you've got a bit of TV. So any of you that have watched Time Team or maybe more recently Digging for Britain, you'll know where we're going with on that. So next slide, please. About me, so yeah, local government archaeology service, about me and local government archaeology services. Well, I've been a local government archaeologist for 23 years, a very long time now. I was a commercial field archaeologist, so I was out there, the one doing the digging, and then I decided I'd like a less wet, rainy, mucky, muddy, cold job, and a job came up at Essex County Council, and I joined in 2003, and I've worked my way up since. Until very recently, I led the archaeology team at Bedford Borough Council for 16 years. Lovely team working within planning as part of a unitary service, and with conservation officers, tree officers, all the different specialists. Wonderful supportive team, works very, very well. I will touch upon the local plan work on a later slide and some of the schemes I was involved in. 16 months ago, I decided I wanted new challenges, hopped over to Gloucestershire County Council, and now have ecology as part of my team as well. And I'll come back to that a little bit later as well. What I should say is in 2018, I did what many of you are doing now, and I decided I was going to do a Masters in Planning. So I did that University of West England in Rural and Urban Planning as a distance course. So I've been there where some of you are now. So but it gave me a wonderful, bigger background to some of the work that I do and have picked up with planning colleagues previously. So how do county archaeology services normally sit? As I say, they're normally at county council or unitary. They can be sat with the planners, they can be sat apart, they can be sat with other specialists, they can be sat apart. To be honest, when you're sat in planning with other specialists and you're looking at problems holistically, as one of the other talks referenced, it works very, very well. So the functions of the service, a lot more than people realise. Where does archaeology, what's this funny thing, where does it sit? Some of our planning functions, some planning functions, some are non-planning functions. Now planning, simply dealing with the potential archaeological impacts of either spatial planning or day-to-day development management. Non-planning, that's dealing with the same potential impacts, but it might be environmental land management schemes, so agri-environment, countryside stewardship, sometimes known, DEFRA funded farmers, what can they do that's environmentally friendly on their farms? Historic environment options can be part of that. It might be working with the Forestry Commission of Forestry England on woodland creation or enhancement schemes. And because I have ecology in my team, it's wonderful in many ways, because what we're trying to do is actually get historic environment and natural environment to work very well together in terms of biodiversity net gain, because sometimes there's mutual benefits that can be recognised as we deliver for the wider natural environment as well. So put the two together, you get much more benefits, but I won't dwell on that today. What makes up the service? Normally a county archaeologist or someone similar like me. You've got development management archaeological advisors. They're the ones who are key to planning. They're scrutinising all the planning applications, all the pre-application inquiries, and then you've got the non-planning arm, as I say, countryside archaeological advisors. But critically, we've got historic environment record officers. What's a historic environment record? That's our primary evidence base for everything we do with spatial planning, everything we do with development management. I can't say too much on it today, but it's statutory under LURA, under the Levelling Up Regeneration Act 2023. It was made statutory because it's so fundamental to all the work we do. Next slide, please. So, our legislative and policy framework, well, not going to go hugely into this today, but the key one for us, Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Areas Act 1979 and the Historic Buildings and Ancient Monuments Act 1953. Our conservation officers rely on something a little bit different, as do our marine and coastal archaeologists. and as do those who've got a specialist in military aircraft. So lots of different legislation there. We often find that we overlap with the government statutory advisors on the historic environment, Historic England. You will get a type of designated heritage asset called a scheduled monument. It's primarily of archaeological interest, highest importance in the country for archaeology. There's a different regime, and it's called a scheduled monument consent, not the same as getting planning permission, but sometimes you'll have something that somebody's put a planning application in for that will affect a scheduled monument, so you'll need scheduled monument consent as well. And at that point, my team will work very closely with the planners, with Historic England colleagues, so that the two balance out. You're not getting Historic England saying won't get SMC, and we're saying, oh yeah, but it will get planning. So that's a little bit of work. The MPPF, not surprisingly, is absolutely fundamental to our work. The government sets out the kind of 3 pillars of sustainable development: economic, social and environmental pillars. Yeah, archaeology fits into the environmental, but actually heritage and archaeology as part of heritage can deliver and support all these pillars being achieved. Obviously, the MPPF also sets out government's planning policies. Section 16 is key for my area. That covers the historic environment. And you may or may not have seen the MPPF. The revised version is just dropped again for consultation literally this morning or late yesterday. We also work within the context of national policy statements. Now, they are the decision-making basis statements, very similar to the MPPF, but they are for nationally significant infrastructure projects. So it might be gas, electricity, nuclear, and so on. And archaeologists are involved very early doors on those schemes, as well as much they are with Town and Country Planning Act applications. Moving down that chart that you see on the screen, there are good practice advice notes. These are produced by Historic England as the statutory advisor to government, and they set out how the principles outlined in the MPPF should be applied. And it might be on local plans, it might be considering settings. So we always take note of those. And then you've got the advice notes that sit under that give the detailed practical advice of how we actually implement policy. And last but not least, local plans, of course. We are heavily involved in inputting into their development, but also according our advice with the policies outlined in those. So that segues me nicely into the next slide, spatial planning and development plans. So I've done a lot of work over the years on local plans, taking into account all historic and local plan does deliver sustainable development by considering the historic environment. So when I was at Bedford, I was involved on 2 local plans, and I worked very closely and holistically with the planners, policy planners, with my conservation colleagues, with Historic England. I commented on the preferred options, which is very high level, but it's important to get in at, because it also includes an assessment methodology for considering whether sites should proceed or not as a site and allocation. So we rated those from a historic environment perspective, and some were like, no, it's on a scheduled monument, no, it's on a nationally important site, no, simply no. Or others where we said, not sure, needs a heritage impact assessment, need to go and get that done, get the promoter to do it, and we'll consider that. For both local plans, I commented on over 630 sites and allocations, scrutinised all the submitted heritage impact assessments, considered the significance of the heritage assets affected and what the likely degree of harm to that significance would be. Now, that's all set out in policy. That's effectively what we have to do when it comes to the historic environment. I also drafted, along with colleagues, the strategic policies and all the development management policies as well. I know my ecology colleague on this call was mentioning having to do similar. I also contributed to all the statements of common ground, where that might be with the promoters saying the historic environment issues are solved. It might be with Historic England saying we don't still agree on this area with the council. And I appeared at examination twice as the expert advisor. What I would say is it's really, really important for the advice to go in at the policy stage, and if you're a policy planner, to go and talk to your historic environment policies. So if, for example, you've got an allocation of 4,000 homes and you haven't done your homework, you haven't spoken to heritage, then it might be that you've got an overwhelming constraint that just simply cannot be overcome. That means you cannot deliver your 4,000 houses, and then if you've got to examination, you really have got a problem. Now, most of the time that never happens because planning colleagues are wonderful and they do come and talk to you. So just a kind of a note. On that note, next slide, nice case example I'm rattling through, but this is a proposed garden community from my old time at Bedford, 4,000 homes, employment, roads, infrastructure, and so on. So it came in as a proposed site and allocation as one of the local plans. It had a heritage impact assessment, estate village, periphery of the county. Nobody really ever been out, been in the same family since the early 1700s, hadn't really changed since the 19th century. Amazing place. What you'll see up in the northwest is lots of hachures and lots of little white curly lines. They are medieval settlement earthworks. They sit next to the Grade 1 listed church. They sit opposite the site of the old demolished manor house. They sit opposite the site of the 19th century Grade 2 listed manor house. It's like an untouched complex out there. The first thing that I thought was, oh my gosh, they want to put house on medieval settlement earthworks, and those settlement earthworks not only are fantastic in their own right for the archaeological evidence they hold, but they also provide a wonderful setting to all these other designated built heritage assets. What can we do? Well, we talked to Historic England colleagues and said, can you schedule them? Can you protect them legally? We talked at length about that, and they decided potentially there wasn't quite enough evidence at this point right here, right now, but there might be in the future. So next slide, please. So what we had to do was try and protect those. So we actually did it through talking with our conservation colleagues and policy planners, and there was going to be a conservation area management plan to protect this wonderful little settlement. And we absolutely made sure that the recognition of the contribution of these medieval settlement earthworks to the built heritage structures was recognised. And you'll see in the top left in the green, that's the settlement earthworks preserved in situ, in perpetuity, because of the contribution they make to the sort of the group value of those, the setting of those built heritage assets. We also made sure it went into the local plan, sites and allocations policy criteria, as this site did continue on as a site and allocation. And we also made sure that that effectively other areas that were not or did not have earthworks in, were not quite the same heritage constraint, were going to be subject to predetermination evaluation in accordance with NPPF paragraphs 207 and 208. So next slide, please. So this one, hopefully, yeah, and it does. I made a correction, schoolgirl error, and put LiDAR. This is not LiDAR, and it's been corrected to geophysical survey. This is the part of that initial evaluation works on the remainder of the site. So you can see the earthworks, they're out, they're in a white. We've not bothered, they're being protected. The rest is the geophysical survey, and you can see possibly up in the top northeast corner some squiggly rectangular lines. That's a previously unidentified settlement along a lane, so that will have to be subject to probably trial trenching, further work, just to kind of assess what is there before we may proceed to excavation or not. And there's various other little enclosures as well that need a further look at. Now, one of the key policy criteria in the site and allocations is the need for predetermination archaeological evaluation prior to a decision. So all that work has led to a really good site and allocation policy. Next slide, please. So the day-to-day development management is moving away from spatial plans. My development management archaeologists and me previously 23 years will go through the weekly planning lists. They will pull off what they think based on using the historic environment record, using their professional judgment and all the knowledge and area they've built up as to where they think there's potential for impact on archaeology. And they'll advise as to whether there needs to be further work taken predetermination, so commonly called an evaluation, and that might take the form of desk-based assessment. It might take the form of a heritage statement saying what the significance is and how that significance may be impacted. It might be geophysical surveys you've seen. It might be trial trenches, 50 by 2 metre long trenches, many of them across the site, digging down and actually seeing what is there. On the basis of those results, they will get a report in. They will assess what the significance of the heritage assets are. and they will consider whether they're designated, in which point we have to apply particular NPPF policies. And the NPPF says if it's designated, great weight should be given to its conservation. The more important the asset, the greater the weight should be. And the reports should be submitted at an early stage ahead of a determination of an application, so that we can look at measures with the applicant and their consultants to avoid or reduce harm. And then you've got the residual harm left once you put those measures in place. And if you've got substantial harm, you would normally recommend refusal unless the scheme was delivering substantial public benefits. If you've got less than substantial harm, which is a bit of a professional judgment, you would look and see whether it was delivering public benefits which would outweigh the harm. So it would be the planner that made that balancing judgment, but we would advise as the heritage specialists. And where something's non-designated, you've got to have regard to the scale of the harm of loss and the significance of heritage asset. But quite often that just means that if it's archaeological remains of local interest, they'll end up getting excavated out. And we'll move on to the next slide now. So I'll just quickly run through solar scheme. This is a nationally significant infrastructure project scheme where all those kind of predetermination evaluation requirements applied, but it was dealt with under the National Policy Statement for Renewable Energy, very similar to the NPPF. Cross-border, Cams and Bedford, we were contacted for a brief outlining the scope of work to be undertaken. Developer appointed their archaeological consultant to undertake that work. What you're seeing up on screen is the results of the geophysics survey. Well, we'd never seen anything like it. Completely previously unknown Roman planned town with an urban form. You might now see in the middle there's a bit of a circle, a bit of a kind of with streets radiating out, extensive streets, buildings, industrial areas, kilns, blacksmith forges. It's got a villa down to the southwest, very urban, very unusual. Some crop marks hinted in 2019. There's areas of large pits that look industrial. This is 31 hectares of a solar scheme. This covers, it's possible it's industrial, and they're using a water source from the River Kim to the north, all under the control of a Roman villa, so like a grand farming estate under that control. So this came in really early. The solar engineering company went, oh, we went, oh, and actually we had to come up with a solution. It was taken out of the scheme. It's now been scheduled by Historic England, but it's actually going to be retained under species-rich grassland, which actually contributes to the biodiversity again. So that's the one, and I can see that Helen is smiling away. Next slide, please. So as you'll see, the rest of the site that's not going to be preserved in situ, so all the to the southeast and southwest, that's all due to be evaluated pre-determination, and that may well lead, because there is, you can see circled probably the red areas, there is archaeology there known from the geophysics, so that is probably likely to go to open area excavation. Next slide, please. I will rattle through very quickly now, conscious of time. So what does open area excavation look like? Well, it looks like that one up on the top left. It normally is done as a condition of your DCO or your planning consent. Most conditions, well, you might be familiar, or you might see sometimes they're in 1, 2, 3 or 3 different stages. They will look to secure not only the field work, but post-excavation assessment, post-excavation analysis, a publication, archiving and public engagement. It's not just about doing the field work and running. Next slide, please. So public engagement will normally happen on site, but it can happen after site, and we ask the developers contractor to submit a public engagement strategy. How are you going to get this message out there? The NPPF says the evidence has got to be publicly accessible. How are you going to get it out there? So that's just a couple of methods, and that's an on-site talk from one of my schemes in Bedfordshire, and you can see there's some fines for the local community to handle. Next slide, please. So just rattling through what happens: fieldwork stops, post-excavation assessment. You've got ceramic building materials, you've got roofing tiles, you've got animal bones, you've got metal finds, you've got all your written, all your photographic, all your drawn, or you kind of GPSed in site plans. What do you do with it? There has to be an assessment period secured by condition. You want to find out what you've got, how much you've got, what's its condition, critically, what is the potential for further analysis, and what does the site stratigraphy, that's one on the right, that's what site stratigraphy looks like, all those records you've made, what sits above, what's cuts, anyway. You know, that all has to be assessed, and critically, next slide please, is what's it going to cost to take it on to further analysis needed. So I've got all these coins, I need a coin expert. We need to know what they date to, where they're coming in from abroad. This pottery, is it fancy regional? Is it fancy international imports? Are these rich people? Are these poor people? You know, are they farm workers? You know, what's happening here? So that all goes into the assessment report, and then the developer gets another bill for the analysis, the eventual reporting, the publication, and the archiving. So some of these sites you might have 200 archive boxes that need to go to the local museum, and all the digital stuff will go up to the Archaeological Data Service in York, so it's all accessible. Next slide please. So yeah, so really that's it. That's your publication report, or similar, up on the top right there. That's what your archive racking might look like after the A42A, East-West Bay, or HS2. Look a lot worse, HS2. So that really is, as I say, an absolute whistle-stop tour. But just to echo very quickly what many of the speakers have said today, is what made my life so much easier actually working in the unitary planning service, with knowing the other specialists, knowing the planners, knowing the names of their kids, but you know, is actually building those relationships up over the years. Give them a little bit of knowledge. You know, don't expect everybody to be an expert. They're not. Don't expect them to get your opinion or your judgment or what's behind it straight away. Take time to build up those relationships, ask questions, find out a little bit more, and you might even get to the point after a number of years where some of your colleagues, your planning colleagues, are wonderful. They'll do some of the running for you, and you know, they'll say to somebody in a meeting before you're even in on that meeting, no, I don't think that's going to work for heritage. And it really is about human relationships. It really is building up, you know, and sort of breaking down barriers and supporting each other. It can be a tough job, but it's a wonderfully rewarding job as well. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Vanessa. And again, really good sort of top tip to end on, all about communication, relationships, and building trust, which is a theme that's come across from all the presentations. So thank you very much. We've had a number of questions that have been popping in the chat, and some of them have been responded to already, but I think it'd be worth just picking up on them anyway, just in case they haven't been answered. So Ben, there's a question to you about, well, with transport planning, do you need experience of private sector first? Is this the main entry route, or are there other ways directly into local authority? I think you gave an example of what you have in Worcestershire. If you just would like to talk a little bit more about that, Ben, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, and I can talk about what we did at National Highways as well. When I was manager there. So no, you don't have to go into the private sector first. Some people choose to, but you don't have to. We actively engage with planning schools and various other outlets across when we're recruiting. So here in Worcestershire, we've gone out to all our planning schools locally to try and get people to apply. And in highways, as I said, we have a highways development planner post, which is our junior post, and we accept graduates from town planning, and we will bring you on board and train you. It's more about, for us, that you've got those initial analytical skills, the curiosity, some planning knowledge, and we will do the rest. It's kind of, as Vanessa just said, it's about being curious and asking questions and having that, and sort of at the early stages acting like a sponge. It's our job to train you and to bring those skills set on for you, because you are our legacy in terms of planners who have gone before you. And that was the same at National Highways. At National Highways, we had an assistant spatial planner role where we would be taking graduates, train them up, and then you could progress to spatial planner and then the team manager. We also have other routes that we are looking at here at Worcestershire, which is apprenticeships, and we're looking at all other things. I will say, transport planning, we have a real shortage of people in our sector. A lot have retired, and a lot of people have moved around into different roles, into different jobs in planning as well. So I find it really rewarding, and there is a real need for planners and new transport planners to come through and lead on these schemes, because transport's critical for their delivery.
Brilliant, thank you. And Helen, you had a similar question about, I think you scared people with your PhD. Do you need a PhD? But just seeing your
No.
response in the chat, what I can see come out again is what Ben sort of said, that curiosity and showing a kind of desire and enthusiasm for the field. So if you have anything further to add there, it'd be great to hear your views.
Yeah, I mean, I think for my specific role, you need some form of, it's useful to come from consultancy. So if you've spent some time in consultancy like I did, that helps with the just general field skills, knowing what you're looking at when you're assessing the reports for that side of the work I do. But I think within our sort of sector and the environmental sector, there's a lot more work that's going on. So one of my colleagues does lots of the partnership working, the council working with colleagues like the EEA, trying to bring forward projects, get funding in for things. And yeah, her background's very different, geography degree and no sort of formal ecology training. I often joke that my 3 degrees in ecology were useless. So I should have done one, and then I should have done a degree in law, and then I should have done a degree in finance. And then I would be in a far better position to do what I'm doing at the moment, which seems to be wrangling with legal and finance. So I think having a diverse base of what you've done, if you're doing a degree, do a master's in something different in an area that you're interested in, but planning is a good sector. It is diverse, and there's lots of different things and ways you can go.
Thank you. And similar question for you, Vanessa, just question here about how critical would you say experience in commercial archaeology is? You mentioned your first role was within that, but if you then want a job working as a archaeological consultee.
It helps. Yeah, it helps. It does help. I'm not going to suggest it doesn't, because a good part of it depends which part of my service, for example, you're sitting. If you're an archaeological development management specialist, where you're responding to planning applications, you're acting as the consultee, then you will be monitoring the field work, you will be monitoring the outputs of those field work, you will have commercial. There's a great commercial archaeological industry in this country. We effectively, are serviced, or the conditions that we put on a service by that. Some of those people will have 20, 30 years experience in the field. They will expect you to know what you're looking at, and they will expect to be advised by you. That doesn't mean that you need to have years and years and years, but at least I would say probably having 3-4 years as a sort of minimum background helps you tremendously. It makes your life a lot less stressful. The historic environment record is, again, we do expect, normally, I have to be honest, an archaeology degree, so you understand the periods and the different artifact types and ecofacts, and because you've got to record them in that database. Having the commercial field experience for that side of things is not so critical, because you're looking after a lot of data, you're inputting a lot of data, and you're managing data. So it really depends what area you go into. But much as Helen alluded to for ecology, I would absolutely say the more diverse experience, even if it's just a couple of years here and there, that you can actually pop on your CV, the better, really. But don't just, I would say archaeology is so much larger than what it used to be. It isn't just archaeology digging holes, it's about placemaking. It's about having that strategic view, especially within local government now, as to how archaeology and the historic environment plays its role in development, and that's almost a separate skill set. Sorry, that's a long answer.
No, that's great. That's really, really helpful. And I'm conscious of time, so I know we've had a few more questions. One of them was about the revisions to the National Planning Policy Framework, the consultation. I'm not going to ask that one. I think it's a little bit unfair because it only came out yesterday. And what
I have read it.
What I am going to do
I
with
have
that
too.
one though is I'm going to bank it, because we actually have a session in February that is going to be a deep dive into biodiversity net gain, and that'll be advertised in the Pathways to Planning bulletin that you'll receive shortly. And and actually everybody on the call name checked the future CPD that's coming up. So Ben mentioned that Witchaven is a new town. If you haven't signed up already, we are going to Telford, which is one of the original new towns, in January for the away day on the 29th of January. So if you're interested, please do book in. Jan mentioned AI. The session in January, the online CPD, is looking at digital technologies. I just mentioned February's BNG, and Vanessa was talking about the work of Historic England, and we're having a session on the historic environment in March, looking at the historic environment. So we've covered, hopefully this is making me feel quite good that I've kind of covered nice bases for you. So please do look out for future opportunities as we go forward. Zane, if you've got, could you just put up the quick feedback form? Part of the work of shaping the agenda moving forward is based on what you indicate that you'd like to learn about. So there's a quick poll on Slido, feedback from this session and ideas of future sessions. So if you could just take a few minutes to fill that in. We don't need to see the answers, Zane, it's just making sure, I think just the code, what you had up before, would be useful. I don't want to see everybody say no, I think. If we keep the answers behind the scenes and then I can share it to participants afterwards. But just the side with the questions and discussion was also where you can find the feedback form as well. So the NPPF, I brushed over that. It was published yesterday for consultation. There's going to be loads of webinars and blog posts and obviously the consultation document as well. What I'll do is when I send the slide pack round and the recording, I'll put links to a couple of places that you may want to find useful to just find out about what is being proposed by government. And Jan as well also mentioned, he obviously works in the Environment Agency. There's a consultation as well on the role of statutory consultees, and I'll put details there for you as well. So as I said, look out for the future CPD events that are coming up. Provide us with your feedback, and just to finish in our usual cheesy way, can we thank the panel for their time today? I've learned a lot. I've found it absolutely fascinating. So either use your virtual hands or your real hands to just say thank you to everybody today. Thank you. Go and enjoy your lunch and have a good Christmas. Have an amazing time over the festive period, and I look forward to seeing you all in January.